So good afternoon, everybody. Welcome. My name is Marty Mascari. I'm with the North Central Texas Area Agency on Aging and the North Central Texas Aging and Disability Resource Center, both of which are under the North Central Texas Council of Governments. And we are all joining you from the Dallas-Fort Worth, Texas area. At least I actually don't know where Kathe's joining us from, but I think she's joining us from the Dallas-Fort Worth, Texas area. But we are thrilled today, once again, to have our friends at the James L. West Center for our partnership to talk about communication through the stages of dementia. But before we get started, I'd like to go over CEUs for those of you that are looking for continuing education credits for today's webinar. We are set up for today's webinar to offer CEUs for licensed nurses, social workers, LPCs in Texas, and also a certificate of attendance if you'd like that. The rules for each of them are the same. You must complete the entire live webinar, not miss more than about 5 or 10 minutes to qualify. You must complete the SurveyMonkey evaluation. That is really important because that's what triggers your CEUs. Please, there's 2 different evaluations for today's webinar, but the SurveyMonkey one, please note, is the one that you've got to complete in order to trigger CEUs. You will receive the link to that in the follow-up email this afternoon. The SurveyMonkey evaluation will be up for 7 days live, and then give them about 3 to 4 weeks. James L. West is gracious enough to be providing the CEUs for this webinar. So give them 3 or 4 weeks, please, to get the certificates out. And then if you don't get it, feel free to email me and we'll surely look into it. In addition to the SurveyMonkey survey, there's also a Google survey, which is for our record keeping to report back on the goals and objectives that we set forth when we applied for the funding to put on these webinars. We ask you all if you would complete both of them. It's nice. The surveys also help us to improve what we're doing. So please take the time to complete both. The Google survey should pop up as you close out of Zoom today. If it doesn't, that link will also be in the follow-up email as well that I send out this afternoon. So with that being said, I'm going to turn it over to Holly Glover. And Holly and Kathe are going to talk about communication strategies across the stages of dementia.
All right, thank you, Marty. And I am going to introduce Kathe in just a minute. She may be a new face to some of you, but we are going to talk about communication today. And that slide isn't supposed to be there, so I'm going to skip it and go right to the outline. For those of you who are getting your CEUs, there's the outline. We've got the course objectives, our learning objectives. There's my information, which again, most of you who are on over and over again, which many of you I see very familiar names. There's my information. I am a LPC. I'm the Director of Education and Family Support Services here at the West Center in Fort Worth, and I run all of our support groups that we have, and I really help take care of our families. This is Kathe's information, so I'd like to share a little bit about her because it is such a privilege, and it's a special time to get to hear part of her story today as we talk about communication. Kathe is from Fort Worth. She actually graduated from TCU and from SMU. She has her master's degree from SMU, and she worked in advertising and public relations. Today, she is a proud wife, mother, and grandmother, and her mission is to help others caring for a loved one with dementia. I have known Kathe now for 7 years, going on 8 years, and have been able to be on this journey with Kathe and her husband, Steve. And I really want to point out this last bullet point. Kathe has written a book, and it's called Love Remembers, Holding On to Hope and Faith in the Face of Early-Onset Alzheimer's. It's her first book. There it is. She's holding up her book. It's the story of how her family has coped with her husband Steve's battle with early onset Alzheimer's, from the first signs that something was wrong to now living in the final stages of the disease with dignity, peace, and even joy. So as we go through today and I talk about the different stages of the disease and communication, I'm going to stop and I'll refer back to Kathe and have her tell a little bit of her story and what communication has looked like on Steve's journey. So that's what Kathe is doing here with us today. You will just love getting to hear her story. I do want to start with just an overview for those of you about dementia, just that overview of dementia. Keep in mind that dementia is that umbrella term, just like the word cancer is an umbrella term. And the word dementia is actually describing a set of symptoms. And it causes that person to have changes, and it is changes that affect them in their day-to-day life. Dementia itself is not the disease. There's over 130 different types of dementia. Alzheimer's disease is the one that we hear the most about because it is the most common form or type of dementia. There are actually some statistics that show that it could be up to 80% of all dementias, but this graphic shows 50 to 75%. And then there's vascular dementia, usually the second most common type. Anything that's bad for the heart is bad for the brain. Lewy body dementia, frontotemporal dementia, there's Parkinson's disease dementia. And again, many different types of dementias. We tend to see 5 to 8 of them over and over and over again. Dementia is progressive. All dementias are progressive, and all dementias are terminal. It is chronic, which means that there is no treatment and there is no cure. Whenever our loved ones or our residents, clients, or patients are given medications that they sometimes call memory meds, Aricept, Exelon, Namenda, those are treating symptoms. Those aren't stopping the disease. Those aren't curing the disease. They're providing comfort related to symptoms. So whenever we do work in dementia or memory care, we are not curative because there's not a cure. We are comfort-based, and we're all about quality of life. And that's where communication is really going to play in. Also, dementia is so much more than memory loss. So many times I will hear people, even that work in healthcare, they will use the word dementia and the word memory like it's a synonym. Two of the dementias can present with no memory loss. Lewy body and frontotemporal can both present with no memory loss, and the memory loss comes later. So I have some of the other symptoms here. But if I'm anywhere, if I'm in a group of 200 or 300 people and I say, tell me everything you know about dementia, I usually will hear memory loss, they forget, and they can't remember. And those, of course, are all the same thing. They don't know that it's going to affect their movement and their coordination and their ability to reason and their judgment and their communication. Let's take a look at the brain of somebody who has Alzheimer's disease. This brain on the left is a normal 3-pound brain. The brain on the right is a 1-pound brain at the end of Alzheimer's disease. How can we expect the person on the right to act like the person on the left? How can we expect the person on the right to communicate like the person on the left? We can't. And there's 2 language centers in the brain. There's a language center on the right and a language center on the left. And we're really going to look at those in a couple of slides. I've got some photos that are taken at autopsy that are specific to the language centers, so you can really see what happens. Now, keep in mind that everyone who has dementia, this is a very individualistic disease. It's not the same for everyone. So I might have that list of 36 common symptoms that we see in the dementias, and my loved one may have, through the course of the years of the disease, 9 of them, and yours might have 14 of them, and someone else may have 5 of them. We can't check off the list and say, okay, they've done that, they've done this, we can't. Because not all types of dementias manifest in the same way. Most of them are characterized by memory loss first, and it becomes noticeable to others. It is not something that the person can control. It is not something that they did on purpose. Their brain is failing. You look at that brain and you see their brain is dying. I've had people have to run this picture off and put it at a place in their house where they can see it so that it will remind them, because dementia, especially in the early stages, is hidden. You can't look at somebody and say, well, that's dementia. You can't see it. No one fits perfectly into a box or a stage. We may say they're in the early stage, the mid stage, or the late stage, but usually there's something going on that they're kind of on a cusp. Sometimes they're in the early, sometimes they're in the mid. It also can depend on the time of day. Care partners of people with dementia need to focus on what remains and focus on what they can do, not what they can't do. One of the programs that we've done has talked about grief and dementia because caregivers are going through grief. They are mourning the loss of the person and the relationship the way that it was throughout the course of this disease. Dementia is not a normal part of aging. Please hear that. Memory loss is not a normal part of aging. But wait a minute, there's commercials that talk about age-related memory loss. There's age-related slowing down. There's not memory loss. If there's memory loss, something is wrong. It might not be dementia. They may have a vitamin deficiency. They may be malnourished. They may have something wrong with their thyroid, but memory loss is not a normal part of aging. And as a care partner, you're going to learn a set of skills and you're going to learn to be flexible. And you're going to develop this skill set that you probably never wanted, and you certainly never thought that you would need. So as we start to just talk about communication and dementia, I want you to think about what communication actually is. It's just an exchange of information between two or more people. Some of the things we do when we communicate is we're expressing needs, wants, desires, knowledge, and feelings. And a person with dementia is going to be able to do that all the way throughout the course of this disease. It's just going to change. But they will always be able to communicate. Think also about communication. When you are communicating with someone, your attitude, your tone of voice, your facial expressions, and your body language comes into play. It is the amygdala in the brain that allows a person to be able to differentiate between tone of voice, facial expression, because that's also our fight, flight, freeze, fawn area of the brain. It picks up on feelings and emotions. And the great thing is we know that even though the hippocampus is dying in a person with dementia, it's going away. The amygdala stays. The amygdala remains, which means that even after our loved one may have a flat affect, they may appear to track or to be looking off at something, they can still understand attitude, tone of voice, facial expressions, and body language. And I'm going to have Kathe speak to that as we get to end stage, because her husband is most definitely able to understand that, and he's in the end stages now. The other thing with communication, it's spoken word. It says spoken work there. I just found a typo. And it's also our nonverbal message. It's the emotions, our cultural background comes in, and our past experiences come into our communication. There's also perception. And communication is a lot more about listening than talking. I tell my students whenever they come through, we've got 14, actually now 15, because Baylor's going to be coming through this next year. We've got 15 different schools that rotate through here, nurses and physical therapists, occupational therapists, speech therapists, music therapists. And I tell every one of them, if you find yourself talking more than you are listening, you need to quiet. It's not about you. It's about them. It's about the family. It's about the resident. Listen. Now, for that person who has dementia, everything about communication is going to become more difficult. Not just the ability to speak, but the ability to understand. We'll talk more about that. It's not just them being able to say the words. They're going through a theory of retrogenesis, where they're going back. And all of those words that we learned, it's kind of like they unlearn them. They go away. Let's look at some of these photos I told you about. What a change in the communication areas of the brain. So some of the loss that a person with dementia is going to have, especially even in the beginning, maybe they just can't find the word. Now, don't panic, because I know some of you are going, uh-oh, I do that all the time. I do it. I'll probably do it during this program where I go, hold on, here it is. It's on the tip of my tongue. But this is when they can't find the word and it doesn't come back to them. They also will start to have some word salad where they'll and then there's the word. They may have some vague language, you know, the thing, the stuff and the thing and the thing and the stuff and the thing, because I can't find the noun, but it's the stuff or it's the thing. That's pretty early in the disease, where they'll come down to some single phrases, 3 to 5 word sentences. And they'll always be able to make sounds or to vocalize, because we've always been able to do that, haven't we? Theory of retrogenesis, they're going back to who they originally were. And even a little baby can make sounds and vocalize, and they can make their needs known. But they may not be able to make their needs known with words. But what's preserved? They can sing. They're going to be able to sing and hum throughout the course of this disease, because that's on the right side of the brain. Automatic speech. And you may hear, especially someone in the late stages, no. The word no stays, because that's one of those words we learned when we were really young. And then, unfortunately, curse words, sex talk, and racial slurs remain. And they remain because they're stored on the right side of the brain, and the right remains, the left leaves. That's a good way to remember this. Left language leaves, and on the left is where we store our facts and our day-to-day talk. And right rhythmic remains, and rhythm is singing and poetry and prayer, our Father who art in heaven. And numbers and A, B, C, D, E, F, G, and nursery rhymes. But it's also because once upon a time, somebody said to us, you better never say those words again. And so we didn't store it on the left where we store our day-to-day language. We stored it on the right. And people who've never, ever used curse words, racial slurs, or sex talk will use them to make their needs known. We'll talk more about that as well. I want you to see the drastic change that takes place in the language center of the brain. So they're going to lose that immediate recall. they're going to lose attention to details. They're going to lose those recent events, and they may lose the relationship, meaning I can't say, you're my daughter, you're my wife, you're my grandson, but I know you're important, but I can't find the word, because long ago memories are preserved. And confabulation is preserved. Now, some people will go, what is confabulation? Confabulation is another word for lies or stories. I met with a family member very recently who was saying, I do not understand why my husband lies all the time. I said, he's not lying. He's being able to fit in the conversation, and he doesn't remember the real story, so he makes up a story because he's still able to make up a story, and that way he can still be social. An example of that was I used to have a gentleman come in my office, look at my wall, and he'd count the degrees on my wall. He'd go 1, 2, 3. I have 5. Tell me about them. And he'd tell me these stories about his degrees. He didn't have any. But we were having a conversation and we were making a connection. Emotional memories are preserved, both good and bad. And motor memories. That's why a person on dementia can go in and out of physical therapy, occupational therapy, and speech therapy, because those therapists who are trained in memory care are fantastic at tapping into motor memory. The next thing we're going to do, this is the only video we're going to watch in this presentation, but we're going to watch this short video where she's going to describe the difference between the hippocampus and the amygdala and what's happening in the brain. And it will really help us get started as we move through the stages of dementia and communication. So let's watch this real quick.
Hi, I'd like to explain dementia to you in the way that it was explained to me. I'd like to picture that I'm an 80-year-old woman standing here, and that beside me there is a bookcase that's as tall as I am and is filled with books. Now, each of those books represents a fact or a date or a number or a memory that I've gained in the last 80 years of my life. So right at the top, my most recent memory, so what I had for breakfast, getting dressed this morning. The next shelf down might be things that are a little bit less recent. So maybe my last holiday, what I did at Christmas, maybe the last time you came to visit me. The next shelf down by my shoulders will be my 70s, my 60s, my 50s. My 20s will be down by my knees, and my childhood memories will be all the way down by my feet. So that is the bookcase that makes up me. Now, when I get hit by dementia, what's going to happen is that my bookcase is going to start to rock, and I'm going to start losing those books, starting from the ones on the top, which may explain why my short-term memory is likely to be affected first. So as my dementia progresses, I might find myself having lost not only the top shelf, but the next one down and the next. I might find myself living in the 1950s. Now, embrace my reality. I go into my kitchen today to make myself a cup of tea. What do you think? Given that I'm expecting a 1950s kitchen, what's a likely accident that I might have? If you thought putting an electric kettle on a hob, that's absolutely right. Now, as my carer, as my relative, you might be tempted to say, we shouldn't let her make tea anymore, that's really dangerous. But there is a simpler solution, which might be to just change my kettle from an electric one to a whistling kettle, because that's what I'm expecting, and I know how to use that. And I learned how to use a whistling kettle all the way down in my childhood, so that memory is likely to stay with me a lot longer. That's not going to help everybody with dementia, but it might help me at this particular stage. Now, I talked about this one bookcase that's got all these facts and memories and numbers, and that's quite a flimsy bookcase, and when that gets hit by dementia, it rocks a lot. Now, this bookcase is representing a part of my brain called the hippocampus, which is more susceptible to dementia. However, my feelings and my emotions, the things that make me who I am and the reasons why you love me, they're all managed separately by a different part of the brain called the amygdala. And that's all here in a separate bookcase. It's a really strong oak bookcase. When that gets hit by dementia, it's not going to move very much. Let me explain to you how the two bookcases work together. So when I was a child, I had a teacher. He's on the hippocampus bookcase. He was incredibly inspired. And the way that he made me feel, inspired, in awe, that is self-stored in a separate book on my amygdala bookcase. So the teacher is on the hippocampus, but the way I felt, that's going to be managed by the amygdala. Now let's bring it back to today, where I'm the 80-year-old woman. I have dementia. You come to visit me. That's a fact. That happens here. And we have a blazing rat. I'm probably going to feel upset, sad, angry, and that's going to go onto the amygdala in a book here. You might go away thinking, it doesn't really matter. She'll forget that I even came to visit, let alone that we had a row. And you know what? You're probably right. That book will probably go. But what's likely to stay with me are those feelings, those emotions, that anger, and with nothing to relate it to. It might be really confusing for me. But let me leave you with a positive example. Say you come to visit me and you take me out to the seaside and we have a great time. So here it is, the seaside, the waves, the great time, the feelings of safety and happiness and love that I feel are held over here in the amygdala. As soon as we get back to my house, I've forgotten where we've been. That book is gone. And you might think, oh, it's just not worth it. Why do I bother? I don't think I'm going to carry on visiting her. But look over here. Those feelings, that safety, that warmth, that's going to stay with me for a lot longer. So I would like to encourage you to continue to visit and to care for the people that you know, relatives, friends who have dementia, and to remember that there is more to the person than the dementia. Thank you.
That is such a great video in helping us understand what is going on in the mind of somebody who has dementia. And I hope you got how powerful that was, that, okay, the fact falls away, but the feeling remains. We talk a lot about if our loved one is placed, whenever we come to see them, big hellos and little goodbyes. Because imagine what happens when we go in and we have that big hello. Wow, what just happened in their brain, that person with dementia? It wasn't cortisol that just dumped. That's dopamine, that feel good. And that's going to stay with them for a long time. It may set up how the rest of their day goes. But if we come in and we try to be rational, we try to be reasonable, and we try to argue, and we try to tell them that they're looking for their mother, and we insist their mother's dead, and we're going to make them understand that. And then you leave, and the rest of their day, something's wrong, but they don't know what's wrong. So the feelings remain. Let's start with the mild stage. This stage of the disease, the early stage of the disease, we want to think of it as normalization. We want to keep everything as normal as possible. We're going to make the best of the situation and keep life as normal as we can. So we're going to go through and we're going to call it the early, mid, and late stages is the way we're going to break this down. We're going to talk about key best communication practices for the person with dementia and for us as well. I know there's lots of information on these slides. Marty's already put it into the chat, plus he'll send out the slides whenever you get the recording later today. Now, I'm not going to go through and read every bit of this. You can read that and you're going to get it, but I am going to point some things out. And then I'm going to have Kathe talk about what she saw early with Steve. One of the things that most people early in the disease do is they try to conceal the deficits that they're having. Most of us would. You don't know today whether I'm feeling good or bad, because as far as you know, I'm feeling great. Because maybe I'm concealing something. We all do it. But a person who is developing dementia or who's in the earlier stages, many times will try to conceal. They know something's going on, whether they say it or not. They may use humor to try to avoid answering questions. I used to do assessments on folks and do that little MMSE, that 30 questions, and I'd ask someone the date and they'd say, well, you tell me. Good answer. I don't work anymore. I don't need to know that stuff. All right. They're concealing. I don't have any idea what the date is. They may also use anger, because anger is the easiest emotion for many people to have. Just like a little child will sometimes immediately have a temper tantrum when they don't understand. A person with dementia in the early stages sometimes will get very, very angry. They're going to have problems performing in demanding situations, maybe in a social situation, or if they're still working at work, going to have problems if it's in a demanding situation. They may appear to be confused. They may have that furrowed brow, like they're just, I'm not understanding. They may start to use curse words more, and they may start to use curse words at times when it's inappropriate in the middle of the restaurant. And they likely are not going to be self-aware. The good thing is they still have social skills, and they can still do the banter back and forth. And for the most part, they can still do everything for themselves in the early stages. They just need some reminders. They need cues. Most everyone in the early stages can still read and comprehend. So you may use memory aids or visual aids. Like if they are helping put things away, you might label the drawer. Now, please understand that at some point, they're going to be able to read, but not comprehend. They will be able to read the word longer than they will be able to comprehend what the word means. And that will just change. And you'll realize that they're back to putting the socks in the wrong drawer or the forks in the wrong, because that sign on the outside doesn't mean anything. During this stage, we want to try to avoid situations where they feel put on the spot. And here come the holidays. We are not going to want to put a whole group of people around our loved one when they're not used to that. We've got an entire program on December 1st called Holidays and Dementia. I encourage you to join us for that. Now, their personality may change during this stage where it's like they're not themselves. They're not acting like themselves. They may be easily irritable. They may get embarrassed because they realize they made a mistake or they said something that they shouldn't have. So mood swings are very common in the early stages. You're going to notice good days and bad days, and it's going to be really common for them to get lost, to leave the burner on the stove, to lock themselves out of the car or out of the house. Some other early changes that you may see, and many of these I've already mentioned, but they start to rely more on those visual gestures. It may be that they're confused in one moment and not in the next, and that's why many times families will say they have control over this. They're turning it off and on. They're not doing that on purpose. We have to be patient during the early stage and start to limit their choices. Maybe at the restaurant we say, I'm having the hamburger. Would you like the hamburger or the steak? And then we've narrowed it down to 2, but they still have a choice. Many people in the early stages will start to repeat. And sometimes it's flat because they don't remember what you just said, because the first part of the memory to go away is usually immediate recall. Use a whiteboard, put a big calendar up, write notes, use sticky notes, have structure and routine during the day. And you may start to see during the early stage of the disease, this apathy that they just can't get started. So focus on those activities that they still do well and on activities that they still enjoy. Our goal is that we want to stay connected and we want to promote their independence. You may see some challenging expressions. We're getting away from using the word challenging behaviors. That just really sounds negative. So you may start to see some challenging expressions during this time because they can't get their point across. This is where we're going to come in and we're going to make their doctor's appointment for them. We're going to stay socially active, talk to friends, have friends still come over, let them know what works and doesn't work. Still go to lunch, go to church. You don't want to become isolated. You don't want to start to withdraw, and that's very common. Again, we're going to focus on normalization. And don't make assumptions about their ability to communicate, because what they could or couldn't do yesterday may be very different from what they can do tomorrow. Speak directly to them, give them plenty of time to process. Watch your tone. I know it's the 10th or 12th time they've said it, and it would be very easy to start to change our tone. I said, that can trigger one of those challenging expressions that they can have. So we're going to try to look through the words sometimes and look for the emotions or the feelings. What's the need that's not being met? Arguing is not going to work. And the earlier we figure that out, the better. They can't be rational. They can't be reasonable. We can't take, when they say those people upstairs kept me up all night and there's not an upstairs, it isn't going to do you any good to take them outside and show them that there's not an upstairs. Just tell them you're going to evict those people and then distract them. It's called validation therapy. Those people upstairs kept me up all night. They did. They kept me up all night too. I tell you what, I'm going to go have a talk with them right after I got some ice cream in here. Come on, let's go over here and get it. And we're going to try to get their thought over here onto something else. They can have one thought at a time. Usually in the early stages, they do really well if a person in authority helps make big decisions. And I'm talking about, we're going to stop driving. And that doctor may have to write it out on a prescription pad. And then that doctor is the one who said we couldn't drive anymore. Or the lawyer had it on something with letterhead, or the minister, or the pharmacist, or the DMV, but they tend to do well with authority. They still understand authority. At this point, I'm going to ask Kathe to unmute and just tell us a little bit about what did you see early on with communication that let you know that Steve was changing, something was different.
Really, with Steve, who had early onset Alzheimer's, it wasn't memory so much at first as it was his loss of ability to find the words to express himself. And he was a highly respected attorney. So words were, you know, his brain and his words were very valuable to him. And I kindly asked him about it. Was he aware that this was becoming a problem a couple of times? And although he lived in denial about a lot of things, he did admit that he was aware of it. Although I know that he had tried to conceal, as she said, and to compensate for a very long time. It wasn't long after that the attorneys in his office began to notice that, as well as his inability to track their conversations. And when they were having a meeting, whereas Steve had always interjected something that was right on target, the thing that needed to be said, his comments were out of context. So that, you know, became clear that there was something going on there. I have a friend whose mother had Alzheimer's, and this was before Steve's Alzheimer's. And then I remember her telling me that her mother kept saying, I need the black thing, the black thing. So she took her mother to the drugstore, and they went up and down all the aisles until her mother finally pointed to a bottle of shampoo, and her favorite shampoo came in a black bottle. And that was my friend's aha moment. Oh, that's what you were talking about. One of the things with Steve that we grappled with, and I'm still not sure, Holly, I'm sure you know what the right answer is, but how long to let him search for the word, or when to jump in and kind of finish the sentence for him. And I'm sure the right answer changes over time, but we weren't certain. Our children were in their early 20s when Steve was diagnosed. So we were all sort of grappling with that. And then as things went on, Steve would get very frustrated. I would try to reason with him, which I since have learned was not the right thing to do, because he would want to record something on TV that had already shown on TV. But if it was printed in the newspaper, he was going to be able to watch it, even though it had come on at 5 a.m. and it was already 2 p.m. And he kept talking about, you know, the boxes, and that was the TV schedule, but he couldn't get those words out anymore. And when I tried to reason with him, his standard line was, "You're not helping me." And that was his way of saying he was frustrated. He wanted things to be as they should be in his brain and on TV. And that was just a thing he kept saying. And I truly wanted to help him. But with that particular thing, I didn't know how. Another thing he did, when you were talking about the socialization and how that was important, when we would go to be with friends, or especially maybe at a cocktail party or a couple's shower for a friend whose daughter was getting married, and he would see our old friends whom he knew so well, but he just couldn't come up with their names. His form of expression would be to give them a great big bear hug and say, "How's the family?" And everybody kind of came to know that. They kind of backed off from those hugs sometimes, especially those people who weren't as close of friends. But "How's the family" became his way of saying, "I love you. I know who you are, but I can't say your name." Another thing we did, echoing on what you said, was he loved to go out when he had to stop working. The way we sort of broke up our day, he loved to go out to lunch every day. So we would do that as often as possible. And when the menu became overwhelming, I learned to limit to 2. I knew what his favorite things were, and I would just limit to 2 choices. And that helped. And then was so glad to take the big calendar that had the colored highlights, you know, with all the children's activities and things, off of the refrigerator once we were empty nesters. But guess what? When Steve got his diagnosis, that went back up on the wall. Of course, it didn't have the children's activities on it, but the doctor's appointments. If we were going to go to the symphony or to the museum or dinner with friends, I would put it back up there so I could point to it. And the other thing we did that apparently was right, I just knew that when the time came for Steve to stop driving, which became apparent, I would ride with him on little errands, and we were going to the dry cleaners. And I kept thinking, okay, when we get to this intersection, he's going to turn right. He didn't. When we get to the next one, he's going to turn right. Didn't happen. And we were headed somewhere, I don't know. And I thought, the time has come. He's going to get lost. He rolled through a few stop signs, going to cause an accident. I did ask the doctor to tell him that he shouldn't drive. And that was a good thing, because I knew coming from me, it was just going to make him angry. So that was just kind of some of them. We did start having those challenging expressions for sure. But anyway, it's just, and we have moved through the stages, which I guess Holly will defer to me as we get to the next stage.
I will. Perfect. Thank you, Kathe. And wow, I love that you were able and you felt that you were able to go to him and ask about it. Just the two of you. I'm seeing, are you seeing, do you feel? And that you also mentioned him not being able to track conversations and then saying things that were just out of, that's classic early stages where he was trying so hard to compensate. And for him to come up with, how's the family? And folks will do that. I had a gentleman who every time he sold insurance. Hello, my name is. And if that's all that happened, you'd have gone, well, there's nothing wrong with this gentleman, but wait 2 minutes and he'd come back through. Hello, my name. Well, hello. But he was doing what he knew to do. Thank you. Thanks. All right, let's talk about middle, the moderate stage. Okay, so we've talked about normalization. In this middle stage now, we're going to call this the supportive stage. We're going to build in more support. They are very likely at this point going to be needing help with everything. We're going to see a lot of changes in the middle stages. This is usually the longest stage of the disease. They may get by the end of this middle stage where a lot of their speech isn't even making sense anymore. Not being able to recall their personal history, getting confused to their location, getting confused to time, and time really not even meaning anything anymore because of where it's located in the brain. The actual time, 3 p.m. doesn't mean anything. Day and night might still mean something. And if they get up in the night and get ready to go, we can show them it's dark outside and dark means sleep because we've known that since we were really little. But 3 a.m. doesn't mean anything. There's going to be a noticeable loss of independence and self-awareness during this time. That's why we have to become supportive. You're going to have a lot of trouble recognizing familiar objects, especially if they are objects that were introduced later in life, like this thing. You can't set the cell phone. That's actually new learning in the big scheme of a person's life. That's not a phone. A phone has a dial. It's a rotary phone, or it might have buttons. But that thing right there might be a remote control, or it might just, it's nothing, but it's sure not a phone. They're going to start to use a lot more actions during this time to communicate, which means we have to start to use more actions during this time to communicate. So we're going to come alongside them with bathing and grooming and dressing and still let them do as much as they can, but we might have to mimic putting something on, and then they will mirror us. They're going to need more hands-on assistance during this time. Sequencing is going to be an issue, and they may not be able to do, and think about all the sequencing there has to do with bathing, dressing, toileting. Also during this time, they're probably going to start to become incontinent. They're going to have some accidents, which we tend to see more challenging expressions, challenging behaviors during those ADL, activities of daily living time, because I know how to do this. I've always been bathing myself, dressing myself, brushing my own teeth. You stupid. And for the first time you see a fist or a spit or a bite or a punch or a kick. Was it in the way that we approach them? Did they see us getting upset, or are they just frustrated because they can't do it anymore? All 5 senses are going to change throughout the course of the disease. You'll especially see it during these middle stages. We have to focus on support coming alongside, having empathy, not sympathy. We are going to do a lot of repetition. This is where our patience is going to come in. We're going to want to make sure and get into a support group during this time for ourselves so that we can continue to be compassionate and learn that other people are going through this too. And we start to figure out what works. And we really start to learn how to use therapeutic stories or lies. Because I want you to hear that last bullet point. They're not giving you a hard time. They're having a hard time. And boy, in the moment, it seems like they're giving you a really hard time. They're having a really hard time. During this stage, written notes may or may not be helpful. It depends on if they still know what the word means, because they're going to be able to read longer than they're going to be able to comprehend. So during this time, also, we want to ask one question at a time and understand that they will still be able to use the word no. Look at their whole body. So if they are walking and they've got a grimace, a furrowed brow, and you say, "Are you hurting somewhere?" "No." "Let me help you." "No." They're saying, "Yes, I'm hurting. Help me." They're just telling you with their body and their tone, even though they're saying the word no. During this middle stage, we do not want to pull away. We want to nurture the relationship. This is really going to become that partnership, whether it's a spouse or a parent or a sibling or whoever it is that we're taking care of. So Kathe, let me ask you, during this time, if you're able to come back on, during this middle stage of the disease, some changes that you may have seen along the lines of what I was just talking about, changes that you saw in Steve.
I was taking some notes so I could kind of mirror what your presentation. And Holly's been with us on this journey ever since Steve went to memory care, so she will know all of this. And I'm going to say that kind of start from that with the being mid-stage. But the big hellos were really important. He was always glad to see us, and we learned to make the goodbyes as short and sweet. They were not sweet in Steve's mind, but anyway, as possible. But after a while, Steve started just embracing my visits, telling everyone who worked there, Kathe is my life. I don't think I ever would have heard that if he hadn't had, but it was so endearing and wonderful. But then it went to baby girl, because he couldn't say Kathe anymore. He just couldn't come up with my name, although he very much knew, and I truly am convinced he still does to this day, very much knew me. So I infamously became baby girl. He would, Holly knows this, say phrases like change water, change water, change water. We had no idea where that came from or what that meant. There's a story in the book that Holly recalled where one day in memory care, Steve kept talking about a pen. He wanted a pen, pens, 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 and he got angry as people began to give him pens, and he would throw it down and say pen. And Holly came up and gave him pencils and markers and everything else, right, Holly? And finally said, Steve, just can you point to what you want? And he pointed to the mini fridge, right? Mm-hmm. And what he wanted was a Pepsi. Well, pen, Pepsi, he just couldn't make that differentiation and get out the word Pepsi. But once he got his Pepsi, he was satisfied and happy. And the telephones, it was evident when he went to memory care, he could no longer use a smartphone, but he sat with a man who had a flip phone, and he was fascinated with it, and he wanted one. So I got him one and just had my number and our two children's numbers, the 3 numbers in there, 1, 2, 3, showed him how to use it, and he could. He rarely called the kids, but boy, he could push number 1 over and over and over and over, sometimes way too often in one night. But then one day I went to visit, and the flip phone was on his nightstand, and he said, I don't know what that is. And I said, oh, well, that's okay. I'll just take it and get it out of your way then. And he'd completely not only lost his ability to use it, but had forgotten really what it was for. The importance of support groups. I tried to listen. I know this is hard for you to believe, but I actually did try to listen more than I talked. I learned so much, and there was just so much emotional support in there. I still go to one of Holly's support groups, and I go to another support group that some wives have formed because we all have in common that our husbands have or have had dementia of some form. And it's been such an unexpected blessing out of this to make these friendships formed in a way we never dreamed would bring us together. One thing I learned at this stage of the disease too was to limit the number of people. Like you talked about that. Don't exclude them from conversations. We had a time in memory care, and for Steve's birthday, I reserved a big room, and we had one of the pastors come who used to minister and entertain there, and big extended family. And I had cake and finger sandwiches. And I stood there and I realized everyone is talking to each other. They're talking around Steve. Steve's not upset, but he's not having a good time. He's not having fun. He's a little lost. And we never did that again. And so a lot of things, I guess, we just sort of learn by experience. But I would say it is so critical in this stage to, as Holly always says, remember to focus on what's left rather than what is lost, because more will be lost. So just treasure what's still there.
Great. Thank you, Kathe. Absolutely. And that is, we can start, especially during that middle stage, as we do start to do more and more for them and support them more, we can become lost in that caregiver role. And so it is so important for those caregivers to start taking care of themselves physically and emotionally. Let's move to the late stage, or the end stage of the disease. And this stage is called the sensory stage. This is the stage of the disease where they're going to make their needs known many times by using their senses, and we're going to still be able to connect with them by using senses, because that remains. It's something that's always been there. Those senses change, but they remain. So we're giving even more support. They very likely are going to be total care at the end stage of the disease. Now, I want you to think about, I said they're going back to who they originally were, the theory of retrogenesis. We were not always walking. We were not always talking. We were not always toileting ourselves or feeding ourselves. Somebody fed us, and then we used our fingers, and then we picked up the spoon. So that's where we're going. And in the late stages of the disease, that's what we'll see. They're going to require around-the-clock care at this time. And if they're not placed already in the middle stages, very likely they will be placed at the end stage. Or if they're at home, we're going to have a lot of help at home. We may have home health coming in. They're going to go on hospice during this time. We're going to go on hospice when we think they're 6 months or less. But I've had people be on hospice for 2 years before. They're just continuing to decline. Hospice is an added layer of care. And communication during this time, likely for the person with dementia, is going to be 10 words or less. And we're going to have a lot of da 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 ba 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 ba. The type of sounds that we made originally. They are always going to know that you're someone important, and they're always going to be able to read tone, gestures, and body language. They're going to sleep the majority of the time. They can sleep up to 20 hours a day, just like an infant can sleep up to 20 hours a day. One of the things that we may do, because they are starting to lose mobility, if they haven't already, they will during the end stage of the disease. So we may do some range of motion type exercises, or again, they may go through physical therapy, occupational therapy, speech therapy. You may find them rocking back and forth or picking at something in the air or even picking at the hem on their shirt. If it is something that's repetitive, this is actually a repetitive stage. And what that is self-soothing. If I'm rocking, I'm self-soothing. If I'm doing something repetitive, I'm self-soothing. So you may see some excessive hand action. During this stage, we're going to have weight loss. The body requires less food. And what tells the body to metabolize food? The brain does. And eventually, no matter how much they eat, they're going to lose weight because the part of the brain that metabolizes the food isn't going to work anymore. They may get skin infections during this time, and they may have skin tears and bruises because of the changes that are happening in the brain. We've got a little flap in our throat that goes back and forth that knows, the brain tells it, that's food, that's liquid, that's air. But they start to choke and they start to aspirate because the brain isn't working well anymore. They may groan or moan or grunt. We always, no matter what stage of the disease, we look for pain first. We assess for pain first. During this stage, nonverbal key is nonverbal communication is key. Now, you can still talk to somebody who's not even using words anymore because they will still have inflection in their word salad. Da, 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 da. Really, tell me more. Oh my goodness, I can't believe it. And you talk to them. They are most definitely still there. And we want to touch them more than ever. Not touch as a task, because we're going to be doing that with bathing and dressing and changing, but compassionate touch. What do we do with a young child who is scared or hurt or we love them? We hold, we pat, we rock, we touch, we put our arms around, but we stop doing that in dementia, and we need to do it even more during this time. Support and comfort is crucial. I'm going to have Kathe come back on and talk to this stage of the disease. This is where Steve is now. Steve is in the late stage of the disease, and he is on hospice, but he still very much can communicate. So I'm going to have Kathe speak to that now.
Well, I will say that, yes, these 3 stages. I mean, when Steve entered James L. West, he was pacing the halls. He went from that to shuffling, to a wheelchair, to a jerry chair. He went from feeding himself to finger foods to needing to be fed. I have gone from baby girl to ba 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 ba, or you. I babysat our little 8-month-old granddaughter the other day, and what was she saying? Ba 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 ba. So the retrogenesis, I'm living it. I mean, they're like passing each other by. Of course, the joy with a child is, they're learning and growing and improving. And the sadness with this disease is it's going the opposite direction. But Steve still, his eyes light up when he sees me. One of the biggest blessings in the last month or 2 has been that we no longer have to wear masks when we visit. I just think it's made a huge difference on every level. He can see my whole face, and I just think that's important, even though I've always tried to smile with my eyes. And sometimes I would cheat and pull my mask down just so he could be sure it was me. But he will sometimes say you, and he does smile, and he sleeps a lot, as Holly said, is typical for this stage. So I usually go at lunchtime, and it's just my joy to feed him and be with him. And Holly's even said that's an intimate thing. And I get it. Even though we're in a room full of people, it's an intimate act to be feeding someone you love, whether it's a baby, your husband, or a parent, or just a friend. But he sometimes will get a little, his eyes start to droop during the meal. And then I just go straight for that dessert whenever that starts happening. And sometimes that'll perk him up. And on occasion, he'll finish it, sometimes not. But I know he's comfortable. I'll put my hand up kind of on his cheek like this and stroke him as his eyes begin to close. And I can almost see a smile on his face that he knows he's loved. And of course I tell him that all the time too. I guess that's anything else, Holly, you wanted me to say?
No, I think that's perfect. You're talking exactly about the very things that we're touching on here, and that's where he is right now. But as you use that word, there is still this time where that is an intimate time. We encourage spouses, lay in the bed with your loved one if you want to, hold them, put your arms around them, kiss them, touch their face. And people do this with their parents. Put your arms around them, hold their hand, be palm to palm.
Yeah.
I'm here. You're safe. I'm with you. It's what you're telling them. And you don't have to say a word.
I'm sorry, I was just going to say Sweet Life Enrichment staff member came over to him and put her arms around him the other day and whispered in his ear, "Jesus loves you." It was really sweet.
Oh my goodness. We're going to talk about some best communication practices across the stages. And then I'm going to leave a few minutes at the end so you can have questions for Kathe or for me. And you can go ahead and put questions in the chat if you're not already. But I do want to go through quickly some best communication practices. We never want to use the word remember ever with somebody with dementia. If you use the word remember, you're reminding them that they forgot. So earlier in the disease, remember, I told you that you didn't tell me anything, you stupid, and you get the fist and you get the words because you've challenged them. They're struggling. They're doing the best that they can. They're having a hard time. We have to stop using the word remember when we talk to someone with dementia. I will say to people, it's so good to see you again. Not remember I was here yesterday. Because I just told them, you know me. Because it's good to see you again and I'm smiling and my voice is up. I must be nice. Even if I'm not feeling like it, because I know they're going to read me. And some of this we've gone over, and again, I'm going to go through this quickly. You're getting the slides so you can read all of this, and please share it with other people. We encourage you to share it with other people. We're never going to reason or argue or confront, and we can't take it personally, even if they are still using our name in the sentence and they say something because that filter's gone. Can't take it personally. And that is hard. That is hard to do. Because I want you to think about something. We've got a normal 3-pound brain that can reason and can be rational. When you argue and try to be reasonable, you're arguing with a disease. You're not arguing with your loved one. You're not going to win because you're fighting a disease. You're fighting a progressive disease. Sometimes it's easier on us if we can think of it that way. That's the disease. Toward the end of the disease, it can take them up to 20 seconds to comprehend what we've just said. 20 seconds is a long time. And we tend to say it again and we change our tone. So be aware of that. And then make it about you Like Kathe showed the story where I had to say to him, show me. Because he was using that word pen, and it clearly wasn't a writing instrument, because I was giving him everything in the world I could find that would make a mark with something. Show me a pen. And he was able to point. Let's do it together. I could really use your help. And we make it about us. Our favorite word's going to become the word okay. Even if they say something like, you're the one that took my money. Well, now I'm going to mirror them with their emotion. I'm not going to be yippee skippy. I'm going to mirror okay. Now you sit down, because I'm calling the bank. Therapeutic story. But what did I do when I said okay? I didn't say you're right. I said I heard you. And I'm validating your feeling. Now I'm going to fix it. And I'm fixing it with a therapeutic story. And I'm going to pick up this office phone right here, and I'm going to call my cell phone, and I'm going to wear that bank out for somehow getting my name put on that account. Therapeutic story. Call a friend, call someone else, whatever you have to do. I've also got on here, if they're looking for someone that has passed away, if you continue to tell them over and over and over that that person is dead, they're going to relive it every time. It's going to be the first time they've heard it. And what are you doing? That type of trauma every single day can actually progress the disease. We come up with a therapeutic story that works. I had a gentleman who used to go fix fence every morning, and when his wife would look for him, he's out fixing fence. Now, come on, I need you to help me with something. And we're going to distract. And the 4 things we use for distraction that works better than anything are food. The sweeter, the better, because they're losing their taste, except for sweet. In most people, sweet remains. Music, their music. Not your music, unless your music's the same. Their music set between the age of 10 and 25, use their music. Babies and children. And if you don't have real babies around, babies and animals, and you don't have real animals around, pull up YouTube and type in children laughing and watch those babies laughing and playing while you're having some ice cream. Or type in baby animals. Videos of puppies. They're little bitty videos. They're usually 2 to 3 minutes long, but if you can just get them distracted for a minute. I'm going to quickly just go through these next few slides. Again, talking about the nonverbal communication. With all of us, words are only 7% of our communication. Body language is 55%. We want to use those visual cues, gestures, and demonstrate. If you've ever done a Dementia Live experience, you know, if you've done one of those experiences, you wear a headset that's playing a soundtrack over and over, very, very loud, because we're trying to confuse your normal brain. And when I ask people after the experience, what could we have done to make that easier? They will say, you could have shown me what I was supposed to do. So demonstrate. If we're going to have them sit down, then we're going to sit down and pat the chair beside us. Sit here, 2 words. We're going to hold up the fork. Eat. Think about your emotions also. What emotions are you carrying? Validation therapy. You've heard me talk about validating. Active listening. If they're doing something like, I don't know what's going on. I don't know. This isn't right. It isn't right. It isn't right. Then again, I'm going to mirror them. Oh my goodness, this is not right. This is frustrating. What's going on here? It's not right. And I'm saying it back. Now I'm going to be moving them to another area, because right here it isn't right. Something's not right. And I'm going to be getting ready to distract. If I can just get them over here to the coffee, to the tea, to the cake, to the music, to the cat. Validation therapy is active listening. We're going to validate and accept where they are, their values, their emotions, even if there's no basis in my reality. Here's some phrases you can use. Tell me about it. I'm sorry that happened. This is so hard. I was trying to help. Notice a lot of these start with I'm sorry. I'm sorry that I made you angry. And we put it on us. Here's some more about validation therapy in each of the stages. We've talked about each of these, but I want you to have this and I want you to be able to share it. Some compassionate communication. You can only control your reaction to the disease. And we don't want to react, we want to respond. And I've been saying a lot of this lately. Sometimes the difference between a reaction and a response is a single breath. Whatever it is I just walked in on, whatever it is my loved one just said, if I will take that breath, force some oxygenated blood up to my brain, I'll be able to respond rather than react. And they can't remember your reassurances, so we have to keep saying them over and over. This is how we treat dementia, with knowledge, what we're doing right now. Building your skills, focusing on their current abilities, and with compassion. Now, I had said earlier, here's my email. Also, if you are interested in talking to Kathe more, I can get you her email, but she's going to come back on in just a minute. We're going to see if there's any questions. I'm going to let Marty do a review real quick about the CEUs.
Yes, and just so you know, I will be including the contact information for the James L. West Center in my follow-up email as well. But for those of you that are joining us for CEUs today, we're going to go over this one more time. And I know there were some questions about CEUs in the chat, so I'll try to answer those as we go here. But we're set up today, or the James L. West Center is gracious enough to offer the CEUs today, but they're set up for licensed social workers, licensed nurses, LPs and LPCs in Texas. Now, as all of these webinars go, I've had many people tell me they've gotten certificates and used them for other licenses that they have, and that they've been able to use them. But again, I want to make the point that secondhand information, there's no guarantee. It's really up to your jurisdiction whether they'll accept them or not, but you're more than welcome to go through the process, get their certificates, and submit them to your jurisdiction, whether it's inside of Texas or outside of Texas. We're also offering certificates of attendance. The guidelines for both of them are the same. You must complete the entire webinar, not miss more than about 5 or 10 minutes of today's webinar. You must complete the SurveyMonkey evaluation. Please underline SurveyMonkey because there's 2 different evaluations, and the SurveyMonkey evaluation is what will trigger your CEUs. The SurveyMonkey evaluation will be emailed to you in a follow-up email this afternoon, and you'll have 7 days. That'll be live and up for the next 7 days till the 30th. Please give the James L. West Center about 3 to 4 weeks after that, to the end of the year. And remember, it's the holidays. Please give them to the end of the year. If you don't have your certificate by the first of the year, feel free to reach out to me and we'll check into that. Everybody's got a lot on their plates right now, so it may take a little longer than usual. And then there's also a Google survey. The Google survey is our survey for the Area Agency on Aging, and it helps us report back on the goals and objectives that we set forth when we applied for the money to put on these webinars. So there's 2 different surveys. We're asking you all to please complete both of them. Even if you're not looking for CEUs, we would love to have your feedback. Our next one coming up with the James L. West Center is vascular dementia, stroke, and depression, how they affect the brain. Is that is depression is behind the thing. But that's great. So Holly and I'm Kathe, I'm going to turn it over to you to answer questions. It was really impressive, y'all.
Good.
Great
Thank
stuff.
you. Kathe, did you have anything to add about what I was talking about there at the end? I'll also, let's see, somebody did ask, my parents still live alone. What are some signs it's no longer safe? They refuse to move out. Signs that somebody is no longer safe, and you've got to look at physical safety and emotional safety. So go all around the house and do it. I actually have a checklist. The person who wrote this in, you can email me and I'll send you a checklist that you can go around the house and check for things, but think about physical safety and emotional safety. Yeah, Kathe, go ahead. Did you have something to add?
Oh, I just was going to say something about my book, if that's okay.
Go right ahead.
Okay. Well, if you all are interested anymore in our story, this is my book, Love Remembers, Holding On to Hope and Faith in the Face of Early-Onset Alzheimer's. And some of the stories that I told, plus a whole lot of other information is in there. And it's available on Amazon and other online book sellers. But one of the things I did want to say is when we designed the cover, and we were talking about a rose is a symbol of love, of course, timeless symbol. And I began to think about how a single rose, how the petals begin to die away, sort of one at a time. They yellow and they die. And that's like memory, language, judgment, planning, motor skills, all the different things that begin to go away as Alzheimer's disease progresses. But in the end, the thing that is left is the soul that loves. So that's how the design of the cover came to be. And I know that my Steve still has that soul that loves, and I love him too. And what an honor and privilege to be with you all today. Thank you.
Thanks, Kathe. And several people had asked a couple of questions. Somebody did ask if there was kind of a definitive test to give to see what stage somebody's in. And really, we look at, they may use something like an MMSE to get an idea of where they are, but we actually look at where are they as far as being able to communicate? Are they able to feed themselves? How are they feeding themselves? Incontinence? Are they walking? Sleep? We just kind of look at that whole person. If they are in a normalization where they can do most things just with some reminders, if they need support with the majority of those ADLs, of those activities of daily living, or if they're total care. So that's some of the ways that you can decide.
But
you can also, yeah, go ahead.
I was just going to say, I know with the Alzheimer's Association, you can go online and maybe see the 3 stages, and then is it Cummings? What's her name? That has the 7 stages.
Ann Cummings.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. So you can find resources online that have real definitive. As Holly said, it's a little more fluid than that, but at least it's a guideline.
Yep. And then Karen Rodian, she used that theory of retrogenesis scale to see where her husband was. And that is something you can find online, or I can email it to you. It's called the theory of retrogenesis. And it gives you a pretty good idea as well. But keep in mind that most people will fall into 2. We'll say, well, they're a little bit mild, but they're in some areas, maybe in communication, they're already moderate, but they're still shaving themselves and they're still feeding themselves. So again, I did mention that on December 1st, we're doing the holidays in dementia. If that's something you're interested in, you can register on our website at jameslwest.org, or you can reach out and email me also. Let me see. I saw somebody typing something in. You all were saying something about holding a fork. What was that? Holding a fork weird the other day. Okay. So originally we are fed, a person feeds us, and then we eat with our fingers, then a spoon, then a fork, then a knife, and they will set them down in that order. Typically the knife goes away first, and then the spoon will go away. I mean, the fork, and then the spoon. They'll go back to finger foods. And usually we'll be able to still do finger foods for a very, very long time. Some people always can do finger foods, but eventually they'll need assistance at mealtime. That's the way we say it, because they're not a child, just like they're going to wear briefs, not diapers. Adults don't wear diapers, and they're going to wear clothing protectors, not bibs, because adults don't wear bibs. And we're right at time. Thank you, everybody. Thank you, Kathe, for being here. It made it very, very special. I hope everyone enjoyed getting to hear from Kathe. Like she said, her book is on Amazon and it is phenomenal. It is really, really good.
Holly's a big part of it.
Thank you all so very much. Just exceptional, you all. One of the things I'd like to point out real quick is, you know, we've done several different webinars on Alzheimer's, dementia with Holly and them. I know as we get to the holidays, this is a big time for us because a lot of times we're going to be around family members that we may not have been around in a while, and they may be at various stages. And just so you know, all of that information is on our YouTube channel. It's all available to you. You can go back, you can share that with your siblings, with whoever you feel like you need to share it with. And we will get this one posted up very, very quickly, because this one is also very, very important for you and your family members around the holidays. So please help us share that information. You know, our only goal is to just get the information out to as many people as possible to help them through this difficult process. So thank you all so very much. You guys did an exceptional job.
Thank you, Marty.
Thank you.
All right, everybody. Thanks. Have a happy Thanksgiving.
Thank you all. Take care. Thanks for
Bye-bye.
joining us. Bye-bye.